Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into a literal game changer, a breakthrough that completely dismantles our most fundamental assumptions about extreme-scale computing. We're going to explore Oikonomia Architektur. It's a system that promises to change the physics of how we compute. And here's the kicker. It does this not by breaking the laws of thermodynamics, but by obeying them far more efficiently than we ever thought possible. Let's just quickly map out where we're headed today. First, we'll look at the limits of modern AI. Second, we'll unpack the deterministic primitive. Third, the three architectural pillars. Fourth, the extreme-scale validation tests. And finally, the global impact. All right, part one, the limits of modern AI. We really have to start by breaking down our current assumptions. For decades now, infrastructure planners and engineers have just accepted these four constraints as unavoidable physical realities. Like, we all just assume that long context reasoning absolutely requires exponential memory. We assume error inevitably piles up as you scale. We accept that thermodynamic cost is going to rise with every single token you add, which, is exactly why large-scale intelligence suddenly demands these massive 100-megawatt data centers that consume as much power as a small city. To make it work, we've relied heavily on brute force stochastic sampling, repeated matrix multiplication, and constant error correction. But what if those aren't actual laws of physics? What if they are just limitations of our current architecture? This is where it gets really fascinating. There is a hard line between the probabilistically expensive norm we're used to and a genuinely physics-aligned alternative. On one side, conventional AI. It's hungry, it's error-prone, and it's thermodynamically massive. But on the other side, we have oikonomic architecture, and it completely slips the script. We are talking deterministic, drift-free, constant memory, and incredibly stable infrastructure. It doesn't fight entropy with massive amounts of brute force power. It just avoids generating that entropy in the first place. Moving right along to part two. Let's look at the foundational solution here, a deterministic compute primitive, known as the core operator. So right at the core of this whole architecture is this operator. Now, the primitive itself is proprietary, but its behavior is completely public, testable, and reproducible. Basically, it is a deterministic, constant memory update rule. Think of it like a perfectly calibrated gearbox that never slips. It maintains perfect structural coherence across arbitrarily long sequences. And I want to be super clear here about what this is not. It is not a neural network. It's not a transformer. It's not a matrix multiply engine. There are no attention mechanisms, absolutely no KV caches, and zero stochastic sampling. Okay, part three, the three architectural pillars. Let's see how this actually builds out for absolute stability. To understand how this works as a full system, you have to look at these three interlocking, falsifiable pillars. First, you have the operator, that deterministic core rule we just talked about. Second, that feeds into the block structure, which is a compositional arrangement of reversible, drift-free transformations that let the system run with constant memory. And finally, the scaling explorer. This is the framework proving that, unlike stochastic models that just degrade over time, this architecture maintains completely flat scaling curves. Now for part four, and honestly, this is where the rubber meets the road. Extreme scale validation tests. Because this is engineering, right? We need hard proof, not speculation. Just look at the rhythm of this validation timeline. It kicks off with a 100 million token public validation suite, which is a fully reproducible demonstration showing zero drift and perfect structural coherence. Then they pushed it to a 1 billion token continuous streaming test with absolutely no degradation of internal state. After that, a 10 billion token long-form stability run, proving reversibility holds tight under heavy load. Then a massive 100 billion token hardware limit test. And finally, a 1 trillion token predictive extrapolation. Let's zoom in on that 100 billion mark for a second. When this system was pushed right up to the absolute physical limits of the machine, what actually happened? Well, there was zero thermodynamic blowup, zero error accumulation, literally no increase in memory usage. Throughput stayed completely flat. Even under that extreme extended load, the deterministic behavior remained totally intact. Which leads us straight to this staggering number, 1 trillion. Now, you might be thinking, how can they claim that? Well, because the operator is completely deterministic and drift-free, the 1 trillion token regime isn't some unknown, scary new domain. It's literally just more of the exact same domain. This isn't some flashing marketing claim. It is a strict mathematical consequence of the operator's invariance holding perfectly steady. And the data brilliantly illustrates that thermodynamic flat line. The metrics for constant memory, constant error, and constant structural coherence are perfectly, beautifully flat. The scaling laws for this architecture are strictly linear in time and constant in space. None of this violates physics. Actually, it aligns with physics far more closely than any conventional architecture we use today, totally avoiding those massive energy penalties. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, Global Hardware and Human Impact. What does predictable compute actually give us? When you have a truly drift-free update rule, the implications cascade outward across our entire world. Think about it. For compute, we finally get a stable, deterministic substrate for verifiable, long-horizon reasoning. Digital settlement can finally be built on rock-solid deterministic trust rather than just probability. On the energy front, it outright eliminates the requirement for those massive 100-megawatt data centers, which opens the door for national-scale grid and economic renewal. And at the end of the day, it becomes a foundation for restoring human agency, reducing toil, and enabling large-scale coordination. I think this single mathematical truth perfectly sums up the breakthrough. The trillion token regime is not a new domain, it is simply more of the same domain. It's exactly why Oikonomia aligns so perfectly with physical reality. The primitive remains proprietary, yes, but the behavior is public. The validation is totally open. And the implications? They are undeniably global. So I want to leave you with this one provocative question. If compute no longer has to fight entropy, what can we finally build? Keep in mind, this isn't some wild claim about the distant future. It is a demonstration happening right now, in the present. We are looking at a fundamentally new, stable, and deterministic substrate for computing. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning those old assumptions, and I'll catch you next time.